Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a cryptographic breakthrough that totally reshaped blockchain privacy as we know it. Bulletproofs. All right, so here's the plan. We'll start with the problem they were built to solve, then we'll get into how they work their magic. After that, we'll look at their huge real-world impact, see where they fit in the grand scheme of things, and finally, peek into what the future holds. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, the blockchain privacy problem. Let's really dig into the core issue that made something like bulletproofs not just a good idea, but an absolute necessity. So in the early days of crypto, blockchains had this really tough choice. On one hand, you had your standard public transactions. Super fast, super cheap, but, and this is a big but, zero privacy. Everyone could see everything. On the other hand, you had these early attempts at confidential transactions. And yeah, they were private, but they came with this massive privacy tax. The amount of data they created was just huge, and it clogged up the whole network, making everything slow and ridiculously expensive for everybody. And this just wasn't sustainable, right? I mean, think about it. Every single computer or node on the network has to download and check all this data. When privacy comes at such a high cost, the system just can't grow. It was like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. It wasn't just inefficient, it was a genuine threat to the very idea of a private, scalable blockchain. Something had to... So the stage was set. The crypto world desperately needed a solution. And then it arrived, in the form of a 2017 paper that introduced the world to bulletproofs. And what bulletproofs brought to the table was honestly a game changer. It wasn't just one thing, it was a trifecta of breakthroughs. First, they create these tiny little proofs. Second, they get rid of this really risky thing called a trusted setup. We'll talk more about that in a sec. And third, they make it super fast for the whole network to check transactions in big batches. It was a total paradigm shift. Okay, let's break this down because this is where it gets really cool. This table might look a little math heavy, but it's basically showing us how the magic happens. See that O log n next to proof size? That's the secret sauce. What it means in plain English is that the proofs grow incredibly slowly. So you could have a really complex transaction, like way more inputs and outputs, and the proof size barely gets any bigger. It doesn't scale linearly, it scales logarithmically. And that right there is how you save a ton of space on the block. Now, about that trusted setup thing. To really get why this is such a big deal, you have to know that other privacy systems, like some ZK snarks, need this really complicated, high-stakes ceremony to get started. During this ceremony, some secret data is created, and it's so dangerous that they literally call it toxic waste. Why? Because if that data isn't destroyed perfectly and completely, anyone who gets their hands on it can basically print money out of thin air, forge proofs, create counterfeit coins, no joke. So the fact that bulletproofs just don't need any of that, it's a massive win for security. It completely removes that single point of catastrophic failure. All right, so that leads to the big question, right? How in the world do they pull off this incredible shrinking act? The secret lies in this really clever process called an inner product argument. Okay, stay with me here. Imagine your secret transaction data is written on a huge piece of paper. Instead of showing me the whole paper, you just fold it in half. Then you fold it in half again and again. At each step, I ask you a clever little question about the folds to make sure you're not cheating. You keep folding and I keep asking, until all that's left is this tiny little square. I never saw the original message, but based on your answers, I am 100% convinced it was valid. That's kind of what's happening here, but with math. And this whole folding process is just ridiculously efficient. It takes a huge amount of secret info, that's the N in the formula, and crushes it down into a proof that's just a handful of elements. This little formula right here, that's the mathematical blueprint for that efficiency. It's elegant, and it's the key to making these proofs so unbelievably small. Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, right? But what happens when the rubber meets the road? Well, in October 2018, the privacy coin Monero decided to find out. They implemented bulletproofs, and the results? They were nothing short of dramatic. I mean, just look at this. This chart says it all. Before the upgrade, a normal Monero transaction was around 13.2 kilobytes. Not huge, but not small either. After they flipped the switch on bulletproofs, that number plummeted, down to just 2.5 kilobytes. That's an over 80% reduction, just like that. And of course, smaller transactions mean cheaper transactions. The network has less work to do. So for users, this translated into massive savings. The average fee to send a transaction dropped by, get this, nearly 95%. It happened almost overnight. Incredible. But, This was about so much more than just saving users a few bucks. This was about the long-term health of the entire network. By cutting down on all that data, it tackled the problem of blockchain bloat, making the whole system more sustainable for years to come. So bulletproofs are clearly powerful, but they're not the only game in town. To really appreciate what makes them special, we kind of have to see how they stack up against the other giants in the zero-knowledge world. And this table lays out the landscape perfectly. It's all about trade-offs. You've got ZK snarks over here. Their proofs are tiny, like the smallest you can get. But they have that Achilles heel, the trusted setup. Then you've got ZK Starks on the other end of the spectrum. They're built for the future, totally quantum resistant. But man, their proofs are huge. And right there, in that perfect sweet spot in the middle, that's bulletproofs. Small, efficient, and no trusted setup required. For what we need today, it's an amazing balance. And really, that's the niche they were designed for. The quote from their creators says it all. They set a new standard for applications that demand both privacy and rock-solid security, but just can't stomach the risk of a trusted setup. But the story doesn't just stop in 2018. Nope. Like any great piece of tech, bulletproofs are always getting better. You can see the evolution right here. We started with the original in 2018. Then in 2022, we got Bulletproofs Plus, which shaved off a bit more size and sped up verification. And looking ahead, there's even a plus version in the works that's promising a nearly 40% size reduction compared to the original. The innovation just doesn't stop. It just keeps getting smaller, faster, and more efficient. Now, there is a big challenge on the horizon: quantum computers. One day, they could become powerful enough to break the kind of math that bulletproofs rely on. So researchers are already hard at work on the next generation of quantum-resistant proofs. But here's the amazing part. The legacy of bulletproofs is already secure. That core inner product argument we talked about, it was so revolutionary that it's now a fundamental building block for newer systems like Halo 2 that are pushing the boundaries even further. So that brings us to the big final question. We've seen how this incredible technology solved a huge problem for one cryptocurrency, but think bigger. As our lives move more and more online and our demand for real privacy grows, you have to wonder, are these compact, trustless proofs not just a crypto thing, but the future foundation for how we trust each other in the entire digital world?